She stood in front of 1,000 cameras while the man she trusted burned her alive. And the most dangerous man in Chicago watched every second of it. The night Serafina Vale walked into the Blackstone Charity Gala, she had no idea she was walking into the last moment of her old life. Damian Cross took the microphone, smiled at the crowd, and destroyed her in 90 seconds flat. Fraud charges, forged contracts, stolen money, all of it a lie, all of it broadcast live, all of it designed to bury her before she could open her mouth. 500 phones lifted, 500 strangers recorded her face while it broke, and then the doors opened, and Lucien Moretti walked in. If you've ever watched someone survive something that should have killed them, keep watching. Like this video, drop your city in the comments and let me see how far this story travels. The rain had been falling since noon and showed no intention of stopping. It came down in hard, diagonal sheets across the loop, hammering car hoods and gutters and the awnings of restaurants where people pressed their faces to fogged glass and watched the street disappear. By 7 in the evening, Lower Wacker Drive ran like a shallow river. Cab drivers cursed. Tourists retreated. The city folded inward the way Chicago always did in bad weather. Not softly, not gracefully, but with a kind of blunt municipal resignation, as if the infrastructure itself had decided to endure rather than resist. Serafina Vale stood in the back seat of a hired car 2 blocks from the Blackstone Hotel and told herself for the 4th time that she could still turn around. She didn't believe it any more than she had the first 3 times. The driver, a heavy-set man with a Lithuanian accent and a pine air freshener that had been dead for weeks, glanced at her in the mirror. He didn't say anything. He'd picked her up outside her apartment building on North Clark 40 minutes ago, and he'd read the silence correctly. This was not a woman who wanted conversation. This was a woman running through something in her head on a loop, tightening the same knot over and over. She was wearing a black dress she'd bought 2 years ago for a different event, a different version of her life. The fabric still fit. The person who'd bought it felt like someone she'd read about. Her hair was up because she'd spent 20 minutes trying to wear it down and finally accepted that her hands were shaking too badly to make it work. Small pearl earrings, no necklace. The kind of understatement that took effort and looked like it hadn't. On her phone, 3 texts from her friend Danny sitting unread. "You don't have to go. You know that, right? Sarah, call me." She put the phone face down on the seat. The Blackstone Charity Gala happened every November. It was old money dressed up as philanthropy. A ballroom full of people who wrote checks large enough to name hospital wings and small enough not to feel the loss, who air-kissed each other over crystal glasses and said, "We really must get together," while meaning nothing by it. Serafina had attended 4 times when she was with Damian, back when she had a title, an office, a future, back before he'd taken all 3 and handed her a reputation that made people cross the street. She had not been invited this year. She had invited herself. The driver eased to the curb. Through the rain-streaked window, she could see the hotel entrance. Valets in black raincoats, a red carpet going dark with wet, a clutch of photographers under umbrellas, camera flashes popping in the downpour like small, cold lightning. Black cars lined the block, women in silk, men in custom wool, the whole gleaming apparatus of a city's upper crust gathering to feel good about itself for one evening. "Here okay?" the driver asked. "Fine," Serafina said. "Thank you." She didn't move for another 10 seconds. Then she opened the door and stepped into the rain. She moved quickly, head slightly down, past the photographers before they could place her face. Maybe they wouldn't. It had been 8 months since her name had been in the papers. Disgraced was yesterday's story. The city had moved on to fresher scandals, fresher blood. She was old wreckage now. Good for the occasional sidebar, not worth a real frame. The lobby hit her like a held breath finally released. Warm air, chandelier light, the low roar of 200 conversations blurring into ambient noise. A string quartet worked in the corner. Waiters materialized and disappeared with practiced smoothness. She collected a glass of champagne she had no intention of drinking and stood at the edge of the crowd, scanning. She was there for one reason. Marcus Webb, Damian's chief financial officer, the man who'd signed off on every transaction that had been laid at her feet, the man who'd been in that conference room the night the internal audit documents got altered, the man who'd looked at her across the table and said, "I'm sorry, Serafina, The evidence is what it is while she watched her career catch fire. Marcus Webb was attending tonight. She'd confirmed it through a contact at the foundation board. He'd been drinking harder lately, running his mouth more. She needed 10 minutes alone with him, 2 specific questions answered, and something she could take to a lawyer. That was the plan. It had been a reasonable plan. Then she saw Damien. He was standing at the far end of the ballroom near the raised platform where the podium sat, and he was not alone. He was surrounded, as he always was, by the gravitational field of his own social confidence, men and women orbiting him, laughing at whatever he'd just said, refilling their glasses and leaning in. He wore a slate gray suit that had cost more than her monthly rent. His hair was shorter than she remembered. He looked, objectively, like someone who had never done a dishonest thing in his life. He hadn't seen her yet. Her first instinct was to leave. Her second instinct, the one that had kept her moving for 8 months through 3 failed legal consultations, and a deposition that went nowhere, and a defamation lawsuit dropped due to lack of funding. That instinct said, not yet. She turned away from Damien and worked the perimeter of the room slowly, looking for Marcus. She found him near the bar, already on his 3rd drink by the look of it, in conversation with a woman from the city planning department she vaguely recognized. Serafina drifted close, positioned herself with her back partly angled away, and waited. The conversation died naturally. The woman excused herself. Marcus reached for his glass. Marcus. He went very still. Then he turned, and the look on his face, the color leaving his cheeks in the space of a single second, told her something useful. He recognized her. He was afraid, and he hadn't been prepared. Good. What are you doing here? He said. Not a question. A low, careful, controlled sentence. Having a drink, she said. Same as you. You need to leave. I need about 8 minutes of your time. She kept her voice even, conversational, the way she'd practiced it in her bathroom mirror for 2 days. There are some questions about the Q3 transfers that I think you might want to answer before someone else starts asking them. His jaw moved. You have no idea what you're walking into. I have a pretty good idea of what I walked out of, she said. I want to talk about the Meridian account, the secondary routing. The dates don't line up with what was submitted to the auditors, Marcus. They don't line up at all. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not fear exactly, but the species of panic that lives adjacent to it. The recognition that the calculation you thought was settled has suddenly reopened. He looked past her shoulder. A quick, involuntary glance. She felt the cold before she understood why. Serafina, Damien's voice. She turned slowly. He was standing 6 feet away with a glass of red wine and an expression she recognized. The particular controlled pleasantness he wore when he was making a decision about someone. She'd seen it in board meetings. She'd seen it the night he'd told her the audit results and watched her face while he did it. I didn't know you were coming tonight, he said. I didn't know I needed to announce myself. The pleasantness didn't waver. That was the thing about Damien Cross that had taken her too long to understand. The smile and the cruelty weren't separate. They were the same thing wearing different clothes. You look well, he said. Don't. He tilted his head slightly, and she saw it. The decision being made, whatever he'd been calculating in the 5 seconds since he'd walked over, whatever he'd been holding in reserve for a moment that might look like this. Marcus had slipped away somewhere to her left. She registered that distantly. You know what I admire about you, Damien said, and now his voice carried a trace of something that was almost genuine, the tone of a man who had actually thought about this. You've never been able to let things go. It's a quality. He paused. It's also why you keep losing. I haven't lost anything yet. No? He glanced around the ballroom, easy, unhurried. You crashed a private gala you weren't invited to in order to corner a man who won't help you. You're still carrying whatever recording device you have in that clutch. Don't look surprised. I know how you think. And you have, by my count, 3 people in this room who would testify unfavorably about your mental state in the past year. He met her eyes. You're not here to win. You're here because losing slowly is the only thing you have left. Her chest was tight. Her hands were steady. She focused on keeping them steady. You laundered money through my accounts, she said quietly. You altered the audit documents. You used my access codes and you buried me when I got close to figuring it out. And somewhere, Damien, you made a mistake, a real one, because that's what men like you do. You get comfortable and you get sloppy and you leave something behind. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he raised his glass slightly. Not a toast, something smaller than that, an acknowledgement, and walked away. She stood there, breathing, not moving. The string quartet changed pieces. Somewhere across the room, someone laughed at something. Then she heard it, the subtle shift in crowd noise, the collective reorientation of attention that moves through a gathered group before anyone consciously registers why. Conversations dropping in volume, bodies turning. The specific silence of people watching someone important move through a room. She turned toward the entrance. The doors had opened. The two men who came in first were large and quiet and wore the specific blankness of people paid to watch everyone else in a room. They split left and right without speaking, taking positions. A third man came in behind them and stopped just inside the threshold, checking his watch. Then the fourth man walked in. He was not the tallest man in the room, not the broadest. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, a shirt the color of ash, and he moved with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had never once needed to rush toward anything because anything he wanted had learned to wait. His hair was dark with a thread of silver at the temples. His face was angular, controlled, the kind of face that gave nothing away because it had been built, year by year, to give nothing away. She knew who he was. Anyone in Chicago who paid even peripheral attention to how power actually moved through the city knew who he was. Lucien Moretti. She'd seen his photograph exactly once, a grainy frame from a city council security feed that had circulated briefly in a Tribune investigative piece 3 years ago, before the piece was killed and the journalist who wrote it was quietly reassigned. The photograph had shown a man leaving a building on South Michigan at 2 a.m, collar up, face half turned. It had shown enough. He stood just inside the ballroom entrance and his eyes moved across the room with the systematic patience of someone who was looking for something specific. Not performing. Not socializing. Looking. His gaze swept left, then right. Then it landed on her and stopped. She had the sudden, disorienting sensation of being identified. Not recognized. She was confident they'd never met, but identified, the way a sniper identifies a target, the way a diagnostician identifies a fracture in an X-ray. With precision and without sentiment. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he started walking toward her. Around her the crowd parted. Not dramatically, not the way it happened in films, bodies lurching back in obvious fear, but with the small, unconscious adjustments of people who sensed something and responded to it without knowing why. Conversations interrupted mid-sentence. Eyes tracked him and then looked away. Damien, at the far end of the room, had gone very still. Lucien Moretti stopped in front of Serafina Vale with 4 feet of distance between them and said nothing. He looked at her the way you look at something you've been thinking about for a long time and have finally decided to touch. "You came alone," he said. It wasn't a question. "I usually do," she said. Something moved behind his eyes, but not warmth exactly, but its structural precursor. Recognition of a specific kind of person. Then he turned toward the podium. Damien Cross was already moving toward the microphone. She didn't know why yet. She didn't know what was about to happen. She only knew that in the last 60 seconds, the entire geometry of the evening had changed around her in ways she hadn't caused and couldn't fully read, and that the man standing 2 feet to her left was somehow at the center of that geometry, and that the look on Damien's face as he reached the podium and looked out across the room and found her standing next to Lucien Moretti was not the face of a man running a controlled situation. It was the face of a man who had just discovered that his calculation contained an error he hadn't known was there. Damien took the microphone. The room settled. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began, smooth, practiced, the warm baritone of a man who'd given hundreds of speeches and knew exactly what each of them was worth. "The Foundation has done extraordinary work this year, and it's because of rooms like this one, because of people like you." Applause. Managed, polite, appropriate. Serafina watched his eyes move to her twice in the first 30 seconds. She watched him make a decision. Before we get to the evening's program, Damien continued, I want to take a moment to address something directly, because I believe in transparency, because I think the people in this room deserve honesty. She felt it before she understood it. The drop in temperature at the base of her spine, the animal awareness of incoming damage. Some of you may have encountered Serafina Vale this evening. His eyes went directly to her. Held. Some of you may know her name. I want to be very clear about who she is and why she's here. The room had gone absolutely still. Phones were rising. Serafina worked at Cross Meridian for 3 years. During that time, she had access to company accounts, client files, and internal audit processes. Damien's voice was calm, regretful, the voice of a man reluctantly performing a public service. When our internal investigation discovered discrepancies, forged contracts, redirected funds, falsified records, we terminated her employment and referred the matter to our legal team. Serafina has spent the past 8 months attempting to reframe that investigation as a personal vendetta. He paused. Tonight she broke into a private event to intimidate a company employee. I think you all deserve to know that. The silence after he finished was the kind that had weight. Her ears were ringing, phones everywhere, recording, streaming, broadcasting this in real time to wherever real time went. She heard her own breathing. She heard someone near her whisper something she couldn't make out. She heard distantly Damien say into the microphone, "Security!" And then, from 2 feet to her left, Lucien Moretti spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. It carried the way sounds carry in empty churches, not because it was loud, but because everything else had stopped. Mr. Cross, Damien's face changed. This woman, Lucien said, is here as my guest. The silence deepened, reconfigured, became something different. Damien stood at the podium, and the microphone was in his hand, and his face was the face of someone who had just been handed a problem with no immediate solution. I wasn't aware you were attending tonight, Damien said carefully. No, Lucien agreed. You weren't. He still hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice, hadn't done anything except speak 2 sentences into a room full of people with phones, and already the entire structure of the last 5 minutes was bending around those sentences like metal around heat. Serafina looked at him. He was already looking at her. Are you all right? He said, quietly, just for her. She didn't know how to answer that. She wasn't sure the honest answer was yes. She wasn't sure it was no. She was standing in a ballroom full of strangers while a man she'd once thought she loved broadcasted her destruction across the city's social media landscape. And a man she'd never spoken to before tonight was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating off him and looking at her like the answer to her question was something he'd already decided. I'm fine, she said. He held her gaze a beat longer than necessary. Then he turned back toward Damien Cross and walked forward. The crowd parted. Damien gripped the microphone. Lucien stopped at the foot of the stage. He looked up. The 2 men looked at each other across 6 feet of space in a distance that had nothing to do with feet, and Serafina watched Damien Cross, who had destroyed her livelihood, her name, her sense of what was real, do something she had never once seen him do in 3 years. He flinched. Step down, Lucien said. Just that. 2 words. No anger, no theater. Damien stepped back from the microphone. The room held its breath. Lucien reached into his jacket pocket, produced his phone, made 1 call, short and quiet, in Italian, ended it, put the phone away. Then he turned toward Serafina and crossed back to where she stood. We need to leave, he said. I came here for a reason. I know why you came. His voice was low, private, cutting under the ambient noise of a room full of people pretending not to stare. Marcus Webb left through the kitchen 5 minutes ago. He won't be the way through this. She stared at him. How do you know what I came here for? He looked at her steadily. Because I've been building a case against Damien Cross for 6 months. And 3 weeks ago, your name showed up in documents I wasn't expecting to find it in. Her mouth went slightly dry. What kind of documents? The kind, he said carefully, that make clear you were used, not complicit, and the kind that explain why Damien needed you destroyed before you could start asking the questions you came here tonight to ask. Behind him, she could see the crowd beginning to unfreeze, whispers picking up again, heads bent together, phones still out, but the energy shifting from shock to something more analytical, more social, the city machine beginning the process of deciding what this meant and what to do with it. Damien had vanished somewhere toward the back of the room. Two of Lucien's men had moved to positions she hadn't seen them take. "If I leave with you, Serafina said, "what does that mean?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "It means tonight you're under my protection. It means Damien doesn't touch you. It means you get to hear what I know." He paused. "What it means after that depends on what you decide." She looked at him. This man she didn't know, whose name was attached to things she didn't want to know about, who had walked into a room and changed its physics by existing in it, who was looking at her right now like she was the only specific thing in an otherwise general world. "You don't know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "So why?" Something moved across his face. Not quite an expression, the shadow of one. "Because I've been watching Damien Cross conduct business for 6 months," he said. "And because the first time in all of that time that I've seen him look genuinely afraid," he glanced toward where Damien had disappeared, then back to her, "was 30 seconds ago." She felt something in her chest that she didn't have a clean name for. Not relief, not trust. Something rawer than both. Outside, through the tall windows at the far end of the ballroom, the rain kept falling. The city lights made the wet streets glow amber and white. Chicago going on with itself, indifferent to the specific human wreckage being sorted through inside the Blackstone's ballroom on a cold November night. She thought about Danny's texts. "You don't have to go." She thought about 8 months of doors closing. She thought about Damien's face at the podium, looking down at Lucien Moretti, and flinching. "Okay," she said. Lucien turned slightly toward the exit. One of his men appeared at the door. "Stay close," he said. They moved through the crowd. People got out of the way. She focused on his pace, the set of his shoulders, the way the room arranged itself around him. Not with fear exactly, not entirely, but with the specific deference that large gravitational bodies produce in the objects near them. She thought about what she was doing. She thought about it very clearly, with no softening. She was leaving a gala with Lucien Moretti. She was doing it because her plan had collapsed inside 30 minutes, and because a man she'd spent 8 months trying to bring down had just publicly humiliated her in front of cameras while the city watched, and because somewhere in the cold machinery of the next few steps, there was the faint outline of something she hadn't had in a long time. Leverage. The November air outside hit her like a hand, cold and immediate and smelling of rain and exhaust and the specific cold steel scent of the lake from 4 blocks away. Black cars lined the curb. Men she didn't recognize moved with quiet efficiency. Lucien held the rear door of the nearest car open without speaking. She stopped next to it. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere we can talk without an audience." She held his gaze. Something passed between them that neither of them commented on. The recognition, clean and uneasy, that the next decision would close certain doors and open others, that whatever came after this moment would not be reversible in the way the evening up to this point had been. She got in the car. The door closed behind her. A second later, Lucien came around and got in on the other side, and the driver pulled into traffic without being told, and Chicago slid past the rain-streaked windows in amber fragments. Streetlights, storefronts, a parking garage, a man with an umbrella, the dark gap where the river ran beneath the bridge, and then the highway. She looked straight ahead. She felt Lucien's eyes on the side of her face. She didn't turn. "You said 3 weeks ago my name showed up in documents," she said. "What documents?" "A beat. The ones Damien has been using to protect himself." "Protect himself from what?" The silence that followed was half a second too long. Not evasive, weighted. Like a sentence where the speaker is choosing the word that costs the least. "From me," Lucien said, "and from the people I'm going to have to tell you about." She turned then. He was looking forward, jaw slightly set, the city lights catching the planes of his face in intervals as they passed beneath the highway lamps. "How bad is it?" she said. He didn't answer for 5 full seconds. "Bad enough," he he said finally, "that you're going to wish you'd stayed in the hotel." The car kept moving through the rain-soaked Chicago night, and behind them, in the glittering ballroom they'd left behind, Damian Cross was already on his phone, and whatever he was saying, whoever he was calling, the specific controlled pleasantness had left his face entirely, and what was there in its place was something older and uglier and much more honest. The car rode in silence for 11 minutes. Serafina knew because she watched the clock on the dashboard. Not because she was anxious about the time, but because she needed something concrete to focus on while she processed the fact that she was sitting in the back of an armored SUV next to a man whose name appeared in federal reports as a footnote and in street-level conversation as a warning. Lucien didn't fill the silence. He sat with one arm resting against the door, watching the city pass, and the stillness in him was not the stillness of a man who was uncomfortable with quiet. It was the stillness of a man who had learned long ago that silence was a form of information and that the people around him invariably said more interesting things when they were waiting for him to speak first. She wasn't going to do that. She looked at her hands in her lap. Steady now, finally. The shaking had stopped somewhere between the hotel exit and the highway ramp. She'd needed the anger to do it. Had found it in the memory of Damian's voice at the microphone, smooth and ruinous, and had held on to it the way you hold on to a railing on a ship deck when the water gets bad. Anger was structural. Anger kept you upright. The car pulled off the highway at an exit she didn't immediately recognize. Not downtown, not the Gold Coast, somewhere north and slightly west. The neighborhood's getting quieter and more deliberate around them. Industrial architecture giving way to something more residential and private. Gated driveways. Security cameras on stone pillars. The specific geography of people who had decided that distance from other people was a purchasable commodity. The SUV stopped at a gate. A man materialized, spoke briefly with the driver, and the gate opened. The building at the end of the drive was not what she'd expected. She hadn't been sure what she expected. Something ostentatious, maybe. The visual language of a man who needed to broadcast his power in the architecture of where he slept. Instead, it was a converted warehouse structure, 3 stories, dark brick, the industrial bones still present but rebuilt from the inside out, with evident money and evident taste. The kind of place that looked like nothing from the street, and like everything once you were past the threshold. 2 men were waiting by the entrance. They fell in behind as Lucien led her inside without ceremony, through a lobby that was barely a lobby, concrete floors, low lighting, a single security desk occupied by a man reading something on a tablet who didn't look up. The elevator was private. It required a key card and a 6-digit code. She watched Lucien's fingers on the panel and thought about the particular intimacy of watching someone enter a code they use every day. The absent speed of it, the way the body holds numbers differently than the mind does. The penthouse opened directly from the elevator into a wide, low-ceilinged space that ran the full width of the building. Chicago spread out through floor-to-ceiling windows on the north face. The lake visible beyond the grid of lit streets, black and depthless, the skyline behind her reflected faintly in the glass. The furniture was minimal, dark leather and steel, a long dining table that looked like it was used for work more than meals, bookshelves built into the far wall with the disordered, functional arrangement of books that are actually read. No art on the walls except one, a large canvas above the fireplace, abstract, all deep gray and fractured black, the kind of painting that looked violent if you stared at it and like architecture if you didn't. A woman appeared from a side room, mid-50s, efficient-looking, and set 2 glasses of water on the table without being asked. "Thank you, Elena," Lucien said. The woman left. Serafina stood near the windows. She didn't sit down. She didn't want to sit down yet. Sitting felt like a concession she hadn't decided to make. Lucien removed his jacket and draped it over a chair, rolled his left cuff once, then his right. She noticed the scar along the outside of his right forearm. Old, pale, a thick diagonal line that had healed badly or hadn't been treated at all. He moved to a cabinet near the kitchen and returned with a bottle of whiskey and 2 clean glasses. He set them on the table. He poured one. He didn't pour the second until she moved to the table and sat down. He noticed that. She could see that he noticed it. He didn't comment on it. He sat across from her, not at the head of the table, but across from her, which she also noticed. He pulled a laptop from the side of the table and turned it to face her. The screen showed a document viewer, spreadsheets, transaction records, column after column of routing numbers, account identifiers, dates, and figures. Cross Meridian maintained 8 operating accounts, Lucian said. 4 of them were standard: payroll, vendor payments, client escrow, operational overhead. The other 4 were opened between 14 and 22 months ago under separate corporate identities. 2 of those identities belong to shell companies registered in Delaware. The other 2 don't officially exist. She looked at the screen. Her eyes moved through the figures with the automatic efficiency of someone who had spent 3 years doing exactly this kind of work. These transfers, she said, pointing to a cluster of figures in the 3rd column. The amounts are irregular, but the intervals aren't. Every 19 days, approximately. Approximately, Lucian agreed. The variation is small enough to look like operational noise, large enough, over 14 months, to amount to just under $40 million. She sat back. To where? She said. He scrolled. New documents. A network map. Nodes and connections, names and corporate identifiers. The structure of the thing made her stomach drop slowly, the way a floor drops when you realize there's nothing under it. A syndicate, he said. Eastern European, operating primarily through freight and logistics companies in the Baltic and Black Sea regions. They've been moving into North American markets for 6 years, port contracts, union positions, local government influence. He paused. They identified Cross Meridian 18 months ago as a viable infiltration point. Damien made a deal. What kind of deal? The kind where you take the money and the protection, and you give them access. Infrastructure, routes, political contacts. Lucian's voice was even throughout, the specific flatness of someone describing a thing they find contemptible but have decided not to perform contempt about. They needed legitimacy. Damien needed capital and protection from federal investigators who were starting to look at some of his earlier transactions. She was quiet for a moment. And me? Lucian met her eyes. You ran the secondary audit process. You had access to all 8 accounts. 14 months ago, you flagged an anomaly in the transfer intervals. You reported it internally. He waited. Do you remember that? She remembered it. She remembered it the way you remember the moment you reached for something and felt it not be there. The specific disorientation of a gap where solid ground was supposed to be. She'd flagged the anomaly to Marcus Webb, sent an internal memo. Marcus had responded within the hour. Looked into it. Nothing unusual, operational variance. She could close the review. She'd closed the review. He buried it immediately, she said. Within 2 hours, Lucian confirmed. And Damien was informed within 4. That was the moment you became a liability. He turned the laptop slightly. They spent the next 2 months building the case against you, altering records, inserting your access credentials into transactions you didn't make. By the time the formal investigation was opened, the paper trail was complete. She looked at the screen, at the documents, at the evidence of how precisely and thoroughly and cold-bloodedly she had been constructed as a criminal by the people she'd worked for, trusted, in one case, loved. You have all of this, she said. Most of it. Not all. Why haven't you used it? He was quiet for a moment. In the quiet, she heard the building. The low, mechanical hum of a climate system, something distant and structural. The city outside reduced to near silence by the glass. Because destroying Damien Cross is not the primary objective, he said. The syndicate is. Damien is a mechanism, one mechanism among several. If I move against him directly, the network closes around the loss and rebuilds through different channels within 90 days, he paused. I need the financial architecture, the complete routing map. There are documents that Damien holds in a secure server, not the company system, a private one, that would give me the full picture. She understood where this was going before he said it. And you think I can get to those documents? I think you know the access protocols, he said. I think Damien's system was built on the operational framework you designed for Cross Meridian's secondary archive. I think there's a way in that he hasn't closed, because closing it would require admitting it exists to someone he trusts enough to task with closing it, and Damien Cross doesn't trust anyone that much. She looked at him across the table. "You've been working toward this for 6 months," she said. "You've built a partial case. You have resources, contacts, leverage." She held his gaze. "Why do you need me?" Something shifted in his face, not discomfort, the absence of the control he'd been maintaining. "Because the access path requires biometric verification," he said. "Fingerprint and voice. Damien built it that way after you left. He used your credentials as the template." A pause. "He built his most secure system on your architecture, which means the only voice that matches the verification profile is yours." The silence that followed was the kind that changes the shape of a room. She thought about what she was being asked. Not in abstract, concretely, procedurally, with the part of her mind that had always been good at seeing the actual steps inside a proposed sequence of events. She thought about what it meant to be the person Damien had framed, sitting across from the person Damien feared, being told that the instrument of her own destruction had been built in her own image. The thing that rose in her chest then was not righteous. It was not clean. It was the thing that 8 months of losing had deposited in the place where her professional pride had been. Dense, dark, and entirely without patience for the distinctions between justice and destruction. "If I help you get those documents," she said, "what happens to me? The evidence exonerating you is already complete. I can have it in the hands of an attorney and 2 federal investigators by morning." "That's not what I asked." He held her gaze. "I don't know yet," he said. "That's the honest answer." She almost respected him for that. Almost. She looked at the whiskey glass she hadn't touched yet, looked at the rain-blurred city beyond the glass. Thought about Damien at the podium, smooth and devastating, while the phones went up. Thought about the 8 months, the deposition. The lawyer who'd looked at her across his desk and said, with genuine but useless sympathy, "The evidence they have is very thorough." She picked up the glass and drank. It was good whiskey. Of course it was. "I want access to everything you have," she said. "Not summaries, everything." Agreed. "And I want to be present when the exoneration materials go to the investigators. Not a proxy. Me." Agreed. "And if at any point your plan requires me to disappear from the city for my own protection," she put the glass down carefully, "that's a conversation we have first, not an order." His jaw tightened slightly. Something moved through his eyes. Not anger, but its close cousin, the reaction of a man who was used to his decisions being arrangements he presented rather than options he negotiated. "Agreed," he said, after a beat that was just long enough to register. She nodded. Then the phone on the table buzzed. Lucian glanced at it. His face didn't change, but something in his posture did. A subtle compression, the way a structure tightens when load is applied. He stood. "Excuse me." He moved to the far side of the room and spoke into the phone in a voice she couldn't hear at this distance. She watched his back, the set of it, the stillness that had arrived and replaced the controlled ease of the conversation. She watched his free hand, which was resting against the window glass with the fingers slightly spread, and which closed into a loose partial fist during whatever he was hearing, and then opened again. He came back to the table. He didn't sit. "There's a problem," he said. "What kind?" Damien moved faster than expected. He was already pulling on his jacket. "He's been in contact with the syndicate's North American coordinator in the last hour. That coordinator has people in this city." She felt the cold again. The same cold from the ballroom, the base of spine thing. And our exit from the gala was photographed, not by press." He looked at her directly. "They know you're with me." She stood. "How bad is that?" He held her gaze with the specific steadiness of a man who has decided on honesty. "It means Damien told them you're a problem. It means they've just been given a reason to agree with him." He moved toward the elevator. "We need to move you." "Move me where?" "Somewhere with better coverage." He pressed the key card to the panel. "My people are already repositioning." She was moving alongside him now, the decision made before she'd consciously registered making it, the body ahead of the mind the way it always was when the situation shifted from manageable to actual. "This is because I walked out of that gala with you," she said. Yes. So your protection is what created the threat. He looked at her in the elevator, flat, honest. Yes. She held his gaze. You could have told me that before you offered it. I could have, he said. I didn't because the threat existed before tonight. Before I walked into that room. You just didn't know about it yet. The elevator began to descend. Damien told them you were getting close 8 weeks ago. They've been watching you. Tonight gave them a timeline. She processed that. 8 weeks. She'd spent the last 8 weeks navigating the city thinking she was doing it alone, thinking the danger was legal, financial, reputational. She'd been watched for 8 weeks by people who operated in a register she didn't know how to read, and the only reason nothing had happened yet was apparently that Damien had been managing the timeline. And now he's changed the timeline, she said. Now he's changed the timeline. The elevator reached the ground floor. The lobby was different now. The man at the desk had been replaced by 2 men, standing, and the way they stood said everything about what they were. Lucien exchanged a look with one of them and received a small nod in return. A different car in the drive. A different driver. As Lucien opened the rear door for her, his phone buzzed again. He read the screen. Something crossed his face that was gone before she could name it. What? She said. He showed her the screen. A photograph. Security camera quality, slightly grainy, time-stamped 31 minutes ago. The Blackstone Hotel lobby. 3 men she'd never seen before, moving toward the exit with the particular directional purpose of people who had been given an address. Her address. Her apartment on North Clark. Her chest went tight, and she did not let it show on her face because showing it would not help anything, and she had learned 8 months ago that the only useful response to the ground dropping out from under you was to adjust your center of gravity before you fell. My apartment, she said. We have someone there already, Lucien said. Your belongings are being secured. He put the phone away. You're not going back tonight. She got into the car. Lucien followed. The gate opened and they pulled out into the rain-wet street and the city closed around them. The amber-lit, ordinary city, the city of other people's evenings, people walking dogs and calling cabs, and arguing lightly on corners over where to eat. She looked at her hands, still steady. She thought about her apartment, the particular comfortable disorder of it, the bookshelf she'd reorganized twice since being fired, the coffee maker that took exactly 7 minutes, the coat she'd left on the hook by the door when she'd picked the black dress instead. Small, accumulated, specific things. The material proof that she'd been living a life somewhere while the rest of her life was being systematically dismantled. Gone now. Not permanently, maybe, but tonight, gone. Lucien, she said. He looked at her. When you said Damien used my credentials as the biometric template for his secure server. She held his gaze. How did he get my biometric data after I was terminated? The question sat in the air between them. Lucien was quiet for 3 full seconds. That, he said carefully, is the question I haven't been able to answer. She looked at him. But you have a theory. He looked away. Back out the window, the jaw set again. I have a theory, he said. Yes, tell me. He turned back to her. The car moved through the rain-soaked grid of the city, heading somewhere she didn't know yet, toward a situation she hadn't chosen and couldn't reverse, and the man across from her had the expression of someone about to say a thing that would change the shape of what came next. The biometric profile was filed with Damien's system 7 months ago, he said. 1 month after your termination. He paused. 3 weeks before the internal investigation was formally opened. She waited. The person who filed it, he said, had access to your personnel records, your medical information, and your personal calendar during that window. His eyes were steady on hers. There are only 4 people who had that level of access after your termination. She felt it, the cold, moving up from the base of her spine now, settling in her chest, displacing something. Marcus Webb, she said. Damien, you're 2 investigators. Lucien shook his head once. Marcus, Damien, and 2 others. He held her gaze. One of whom you trust. The car went over a bridge. Below, the Chicago River ran black and flat in the rain, the lights of the city broken across its surface in long, fractured columns. She stared at him. "Who?" she said. He reached into his jacket, produced a folded photograph, set it on the seat between them. She looked down, and the ground dropped out from under her entirely. She picked up the photograph. It was a standard personnel headshot, the kind taken for company ID badges. Clean background, neutral expression, the subject caught in the specific flatness of someone who knew they were being photographed for a functional rather than personal purpose. She knew the photograph. She'd seen it a dozen times in the cross-meridian internal directory. Danny Reeves, her best friend for 6 years, her emergency contact, the person who'd sat with her on her apartment floor the night she'd been terminated, who'd brought food she didn't eat and said the right things and held her together through the first impossible weeks, the person who'd texted her tonight. "You don't have to go, you know that, right? Sarah, call me." She set the photograph down on the seat between them. She looked at it. She looked at it the way you look at something your eyes are reporting and your brain is refusing to process, the two systems running in parallel without connecting, the information present but not yet absorbed into anything operational. "No," she said. The word came out flat, not a protest, more like a correction of something factually wrong. Lucien didn't push. He sat with his hands loose in his lap and let her have the silence, and she registered distantly that this was a thing he was doing deliberately, that he understood what the photograph meant, what it cost, and had decided the decent thing was to give her room to receive it. She didn't want room. "Explain it to me," she said. "All of it." He reached across and retrieved the photograph, put it back in his jacket. "Danny Reeves has worked as a paralegal at Halloran and Cross for 4 years," he said. "The firm handles Cross Meridian's corporate legal work. She was placed there through a referral from Marcus Webb 18 months before you were terminated." Serafina heard that, placed it in sequence. "She was already working for Damien when we met." "She was already working in proximity to Damien's legal team," Lucy said. "Whether the relationship started as surveillance or became it later, I don't know yet. What I know is that in the 7 weeks after your termination, Danny Reeves accessed your personnel file 4 times using a temporary administrative credential issued by the firm's HR system. The credential was logged. The accesses were not flagged because the file had already been deactivated. She pulled my biometric data. She pulled your medical records, your fingerprint verification enrollment forms from the company security registration, and your voice print file from the IT security archive." He paused. "The voice print was recorded when you set up your senior level authentication 18 months ago. You would have read a standard verification phrase." She remembered it. She remembered sitting at her desk on a Tuesday morning, IT department call, reading a sentence into her phone's microphone for the security protocol. A sentence that had been chosen, she'd been told, because it covered the full phonemic range required for voice recognition software. She'd read it without thinking about it. It had taken 30 seconds, 18 months ago. "She gave all of it to Marcus," Serafina said. "Who gave it to Damien's technical team?" Lucien's voice was even throughout. "Who built the biometric profile and installed it on the private server?" She was aware of her breathing. She was making herself breathe at a normal rate and depth, not because she was calm, but because it was the only physical thing she could control right now, and she needed to control something. 6 years. Danny had been in her life for 6 years. She'd been the person Serafina called when her father got sick. She'd been the person who'd driven her home from the hospital the night of the accident 2 winters ago. She'd been, in the vocabulary of Serafina's actual daily life, the person who existed in the category of unconditional. And somewhere inside that 6 years, she had been something else. "Does she know what they were planning to do to me?" Serafina said. "Does she know the full scope?" Lucien was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what she was told," he said. "I know what she did." It was an honest distinction, and she hated it for being one, because it left a space she didn't want left, the space where she would have to decide eventually what she believed about Danny's intentions, and she was not ready to do that yet, and she was not sure she ever would be. "Where is she now?" Serafina said. "Her apartment, as far as we know." "Has she been told that I know?" "No." She looked out the window. The city moved past. She didn't see it. Good, she said. Leave it that way. Lucian looked at her. For now, she added. The car turned. The neighborhood outside had changed. She didn't know this part of the city well. The streets narrower, less commercial, residential blocks with the quiet density of places that kept to themselves. Where are we going? She said. A secondary location. Secure. Your people? Yes. She nodded. Let it be. She spent the rest of the drive not thinking about Danny. That was a specific, deliberate effort, taking the thing and setting it aside in a compartment she could close and lock, not because it didn't matter, but because letting it matter right now would cost her something she couldn't spare. She'd learned this particular skill in the 8 months since her termination. Compartmentalization wasn't denial. It was triage. The car stopped in front of a 3-flat building on a narrow block, gray stone, iron railings, the kind of building that had been solid for 60 years and would be solid for 60 more. No visible security from the street. A mailbox with a name she didn't recognize. 3rd floor, Lucy again told her. She followed him upstairs that were carpeted and slightly worn and smelled like old wood and whatever someone on the 2nd floor had cooked for dinner. The apartment on the 3rd floor was not the penthouse. It was 2 rooms, clean, spare, with the functional anonymity of a place maintained for use rather than habitation. A couch, a table, a kitchen with provisions, a bedroom with a locked cabinet. The windows looked onto the street from behind frosted lower panes. A man was already there, 40, compact, dark eyes that moved to Serafina once, and then to Lucien with the steady patience of someone waiting for instruction. Vasile, Lucien said. She stays here tonight, whatever she needs. Vasile nodded. He didn't speak to her. He moved to the kitchen and produced coffee without being asked, which she noted. Lucien stayed for 40 minutes. He spread documents across the table, physical documents, printed, flagged with tabs, and walked her through what he had and what he needed. The server Damien maintained was housed off-site, accessed remotely through a 2-stage authentication. The first stage was a password protocol his technical team had already cracked. The second stage was the biometric lock. Fingerprint and voice, both required in sequence, within a 30-second window. The voice verification uses a phrase, Serafina said. The same phrase, Lucien confirmed. The enrollment phrase. We have the original recording. She looked at him. That's not how it works, she said. Voice verification systems aren't matching recordings. They're matching live voice print. Frequency, resonance, the minor variations in real-time speech. You can't play a recording. No, but you can provide the live voice. I can provide the live voice of a phrase recorded 18 months ago. My voice has changed. We have a technical solution for the variation. What we can't replicate is your voice entirely. She looked at the documents, at the structure of what she was being asked to step into. So you need me in front of the system, live. We need you in front of the system. Yes. She sat with that for a moment. When? She said. There's a window in 72 hours. Damien is attending a conference in Washington. He'll be away from the city for 36 hours. During that window, remote access to the server is the only access. He won't be watching the authentication logs in real time. And if something goes wrong, Lucien held her gaze, then we adapt. She nodded slowly. He left an hour later and she sat in the spare apartment on a couch that smelled like nothing and listened to Vasile make himself coffee in the kitchen and thought about Danny's face. The specific quality of Danny's face when Serafina had called her from the lobby of the employment attorney's office 7 months ago, voice barely holding, and Danny had said, I'm coming, don't move, I'm coming right now. The specificity of that. The realness of it. The thing about betrayal that nobody told you, she thought, was that the history didn't stop being real. It didn't retroactively empty. 6 years of genuine moments didn't become false because one layer of them had been something else. They just became unbearable in a different way. She didn't sleep well. She slept in pieces, an hour, then awake in the dark of a room she didn't know, the sounds of the building settling around her like a strange language. The rain had stopped. Somewhere after 3 in the morning, she heard a car alarm start and cut off and start again. And she lay in the dark and thought about the photograph and the enrollment phrase and the 30-second window, and the 72 hours. Morning came gray and cold through the frosted glass. Vasily produced breakfast without being asked, eggs, toast, coffee, and she ate standing at the kitchen counter because she wasn't ready to feel settled, and he didn't comment on that. Lucien arrived at 9. He looked like he hadn't slept either, though on him it showed differently. Not in softness, but in a kind of stripped-down economy of expression, the face down to its structural elements, nothing spare operating. He was carrying a tablet and a phone, and the jacket he'd worn last night was replaced by a dark Henley and a heavier coat. Damien filed a complaint with CPD this morning, he said without preamble. Trespassing and harassment, you at the gala. She stared at him. He moved fast. He's managing the narrative, Lucien said. Same play, different board. His attorney released a statement at 7 a.m. It's already in 3 outlets. He set the tablet on the table, screen up. She read the statement. It was precise and specific and very well crafted, acknowledging the previous evening, characterizing Serafina's presence as a continuation of a documented pattern of harassment, referencing the legal proceedings with language designed to sound measured and sad about the whole thing. Damien was quoted once, briefly. I wish her well, but I can't allow this behavior to continue. He's trying to get ahead of me before I can use anything, she said. He's trying to establish that anything you say is motivated by a harassment campaign. Lucien sat. If you go to investigators now, the first question they ask is why you were at a private event you weren't invited to. The second question is why you have a documented pattern of targeting cross-meridian employees. The complaint gives him the frame. She put the tablet down. She thought about the 72 hours, about the server, about the documents inside it that would dismantle the frame completely if she could get to them. We need to accelerate, she said. Lucien looked at her. The conference window, she said. You said 72 hours. Can it be done in 48? It increases risk. Damien is moving faster than your timeline. If he goes to Washington and comes back and decides to reroute the server or change the authentication before we access it, I know. Then 48 hours. Lucien was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man running calculations she couldn't see, the internal arithmetic of a situation with too many variables to reduce cleanly. I'll make some calls, he said. He went to the other room. She heard his voice, low and constant, shifting between English and what she thought was Italian, and something else she didn't recognize. She stood at the window, looked at the gray morning street, a woman walking a dog, a delivery truck idling at the corner, the ordinary infrastructure of a city going about its business at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday with no awareness that anything in particular was happening. Her phone buzzed. She'd had it off since last night. She turned the screen on now. 14 missed calls, 11 from Danny. The most recent text sent at 7:43 a.m. Sarah. I saw the news. Please call me. I'm scared for you. Please. She read it 3 times. The thing that moved through her was not the anger she'd expected. It was something colder and more exact. The specific grief of recognizing a performance and knowing it was good enough that you couldn't entirely stop responding to it. Because some part of her, even now, even with the photograph and the credential logs and the biometric data, heard Danny's voice in that text and felt the pull of 6 years, of unconditional. She turned the phone face down on the table. Lucien came back. 48 hours is possible, he said. It requires moving one component of the operation earlier than planned, which creates a seam. What kind of seam? There's a man named Gregor Vass, he said. He sat across from her. His voice was measured, the way it got when the information was serious. He's the syndicate's North American coordinator, the one I told you about last night, the one Damien contacted. Vass has been in Chicago for 3 days. He was due to leave before the server operation. If we accelerate, he's still in the city when we move. Yeah. Is that a problem? It means if anything triggers the authentication, if Damien's system logs an access attempt and sends an alert, Vass is close enough to respond within the hour instead of at a distance. She looked at Lucien. And if he responds? Lucien met her gaze directly. Then this becomes a different kind of operation than I planned. She understood what that meant. She let herself understand it fully, without softening. Okay, she said. Lucian studied her face. You don't have to be part of the physical access, he said. We can set up the biometric remotely. You provide the voice verification from a secure location while my people are on site. No. She shook her head once. If something goes wrong with the authentication, I need to be there to troubleshoot it. Your technical people can crack passwords. They can't make my voice sound like my voice if the system rejects the first attempt. A beat. That's a reasonable argument, he said. It's the only argument, she said. You know I'm right. He was quiet for a moment. I know you're right, he said. The next 36 hours had the quality of a held breath stretched past the point where holding it was comfortable. Lucien's people came and went from the apartment in a rotation that she gradually began to map. 3 of them on a 6-hour pattern, always one present, always the same quality of attentive stillness. She worked through the documents Lucian had left her, building the map of Cross Meridian's account structure from memory and cross-referencing against the transaction records, finding the seams and the load-bearing connections, learning the architecture of the thing that had been built against her so that she could take it apart the same way. From the inside, at the joints. Lucien came back that evening with food from somewhere good and ate with her at the table while they went over the access protocol for the server. He was precise and patient and occasionally wrong about operational details that she corrected. And each time she corrected him, he absorbed it without resistance and adjusted, which told her something about how his mind worked that she filed away without deciding yet what to do with it. At one point, she looked up from the documents and found him watching her. What? She said. Nothing, he said, and looked back at the papers. She didn't push it. She thought about it later, lying in the dark of the small bedroom. The way he'd been watching her, not assessing, not calculating. Something quieter. She'd seen that look before, in a different man, a long time before Damien, and she was not ready to examine what it meant in this context, and she made herself stop thinking about it and go through the access protocol again instead. Day 2. Lucien arrived at 7 in the morning with the kind of controlled quiet that meant something had happened. Vass moved up his departure, he said. He's leaving Chicago tonight. She looked at him. That's good, she said. That closes the seam. It closes one seam. He set his phone on the table and she looked at the screen. A message in a language she didn't read. Short, 3 lines, followed by a photograph. The photograph was of her apartment building, taken last night. They went back, she said. They went back, he confirmed. 2 men, different from the first group. They were inside for approximately 20 minutes before our person on the block called it in. She stared at the photograph, at the familiar brick facade of the building she'd lived in for 3 years, the entrance she'd walked through thousands of times. They were looking for something, she said. They were looking for the same thing we need, Lucien said. The backup drive. She went very still. 3 months ago, before she'd fully understood the scope of what she was dealing with, she'd copied a set of files from her personal archive onto an encrypted drive. Old files, work files she'd been allowed to keep, correspondence, personal financial records. She'd done it as a precaution, out of the same instinct that made her document everything, that made her flag anomalies in writing, that had ultimately made her dangerous enough to destroy. She'd told one person about the drive. The silence in the room was total. Lucien watched her face. She could feel him watching it, and she couldn't control what was on it in that moment because the calculation was happening too fast, and the answer was too clear, and the answer was the thing she'd spent 36 hours keeping in the locked compartment. Danny, she said. Not a question. Lucien didn't answer. She told them about the drive, Serafina said. She's the only person who knew. The compartment she'd locked 2 days ago opened now, and there was nothing she could do about that. The 6 years, the phone calls, the hospital, the apartment floor, all of it running simultaneously with the credential logs and the photograph and the men who'd gone into her building looking for a drive that only one person knew existed. She stood up. She walked to the window, put her hand against the glass. The street below was empty, gray morning, nothing moving yet. She didn't just pull my files, Serafina said. Her voice was coming out level, which surprised her. She's been reporting to them actively, the whole time. Through the investigation, through... She stopped. started again. Every conversation we had after I was terminated, every strategy session, every time I told her what I was planning, who I was talking to. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. She was feeding it to them. Behind her, she heard Lucien stand. She heard him move. He stopped a few feet behind her. "Yes," he said. The word landed like a stone into still water. She felt the ripple of it move through her. "Why didn't you tell me immediately?" she said. "When you first found out?" "Because I needed you functional," he said. "Not, don't." She turned around. He was closer than she'd realized. She looked at him directly. "Don't tell me you were managing me." His jaw tightened. "I was protecting the operation," he said. "And yes, protecting you. By deciding what I could handle. By sequencing information at a rate you could absorb without... Without what?" Her voice had an edge now that she wasn't moderating. "Without falling apart? Without making decisions you hadn't approved?" She held his gaze. "I'm not one of your assets, Lucy." "I don't get handled." The silence between them was sharp. He didn't look away. "You're right," he said. She hadn't expected that. It didn't soften anything, but it registered. She turned back to the window. "The drive is gone," she said. "Whatever was on it." "The drive is not gone," Lucien said. "Our person recovered it before they reached it. It's secure." She processed that. "When?" 4 hours ago. I've had eyes on your building since the first incursion. When they went back, my person got there first." She turned around again. "You knew they were going back." "I anticipated it. And you didn't tell me." His expression held. "I'm telling you now," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, at the controlled patience of his face, the specific quality of it. Not remotely apologetic, not performing contrition, just present with the consequences of a decision he'd made and was not going to pretend he hadn't made. "If you make one more decision about what I know and when," she said, "I walk. I take whatever you have on Damien. I take it to federal investigators myself. I burn the timeline and I accept whatever happens." He held her gaze. "I understand," he said. "Say yes or no." A beat. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. Her phone, face down on the table, buzzed. They both looked at it. She picked it up. Unknown number, text message, 4 words and an attachment. "Check your email, Sarah." She opened the email app. A message from an address she didn't recognize, sent 11 minutes ago. No subject line. The body of the email was a single sentence. "I'm sorry. I didn't know it would go this far. There's something you need to see." The attachment was a file. She opened it. It took her 10 seconds to understand what she was looking at, 20 seconds to understand what it meant. She set the phone down on the table with careful deliberateness and looked at Lucien with the steady, stripped-down expression of someone who has just received damage and is deciding how to remain standing. "Danny didn't just give them the biometric data," she said. "She gave them something else." She looked at the phone screen. "She gave them the internal communications between me and the attorney I was working with 3 months ago, the privilege logs, the strategy documents." Lucien looked at the screen. His jaw set. "Which means," Serafina continued, "that every angle of approach I've been planning for the last 3 months, every protected communication, every legal strategy, everything I thought was confidential." "They know," Lucien said. "They know," she confirmed. "All of it." The room was very quiet. She looked at the email again. "I didn't know it would go this far." She thought about what that meant, what it didn't mean. The space between not knowing the scale of a thing and choosing to participate in it anyway, the moral geometry of that, the question of whether the size of the damage you caused mattered if you'd been willing to cause some damage all along. She closed the email. "The server operation," she said. "Everything we've been planning, if they know my approach, they know I've been building toward access. They might have already changed the authentication. Or they're waiting for us to attempt it," Lucien said. His voice had gone to a different register, lower, more deliberate, the register of a man transitioning from planning to something else. So we're walking into a trap, she said. Potentially. She looked at him. Then we need to change what we're walking in with, she said. Lucian was very still, watching her. What are you thinking? He said. She picked up the phone, looked at the unknown number that had sent her the text. Thought about Danny who'd just sent her a warning, which was either genuine guilt or another layer of the same performance, and she was not going to know which until she was standing in front of her. I'm thinking, Serafina said slowly, that if they know my strategy, then the only useful move is to give them a different strategy to watch. She met Lucien's eyes. I'm thinking we use the trap. Explain. We let them believe the server operation is proceeding as planned. We let them position for it. She held his gaze. And then we don't go for the server. Lucien went very still. Then what do we go for? She looked at him steadily. We go for Gregor Vass, she said, before he leaves the city tonight. The silence that followed was not the silence of a man being asked to do something he hadn't considered. It was the silence of a man who had considered it and made a decision not to pursue it, and was now being asked to revisit that decision by a woman who, 36 hours ago, hadn't known Gregor Vass existed. Lucien's expression changed, not into agreement, into something more complicated. The look of a man recalibrating, the look of someone taking a measurement. The silence stretched for 4 full seconds. Lucien stood with his arms loose at his sides and looked at Serafina across the table with the expression of a man who had just watched a variable he thought he understood reveal a second nature. Not surprise exactly. Something more precise than that. The recalibration of an estimate that had been accurate but incomplete. Vass leaves tonight, he said. We have maybe 8 hours. Then we have 8 hours. Going after Vass directly is not a clean operation. His voice was level. He travels with 4 men, minimum. The location he's been using is a secured commercial property in Pilsen. Cameras, private security, a ground floor that's essentially a kill box if you go in without preparation. I'm not suggesting we go in, she said. I'm suggesting we draw him out. Lucien looked at her. He's expecting us to move on the server, she said. He's positioned for that, which means he's stationary, watching, waiting, not moving. She picked up the phone and looked again at the 4-word text. Check your email, Sarah. Danny just told me something, not on purpose, but she told me. They know my legal strategy, they know my attorney contacts, they know I've been trying to build a formal case. She set the phone down. What they don't know is that I know they know. Lucien was very still. So we give them a move they're waiting for, he said slowly. We make noise about the server. We make it look like we're preparing the access operation. We let that information get back to Vass through whatever channel Danny has been using. She held his gaze. He'll consolidate. He'll want to be close enough to respond when the attempt triggers. He comes out of the secured property and into a position of our choosing. Danny is the channel, Lucien said. Danny is the channel, Serafina confirmed, which means I need to call her. The words cost something. She felt where they came from and what they cost, and she kept her face neutral because the cost was not relevant to the operation. Lucien studied her for a moment. You understand that if she's still active, he said carefully, if she's still reporting, that call tells them exactly where you are. I know. We'd need to move you before you make it. I know that too. A beat. Okay, he said. The next 2 hours moved fast. Lucien made calls. His people shifted. Vasily was replaced by a man named Cord, younger, American, with the flat Midwestern vowels of someone from Ohio and the specific watchful stillness of someone who'd spent time in places where stillness was a survival skill. A second car was brought around. The apartment on the 3rd floor became a relay point rather than a shelter. They moved to a location 6 blocks away. A commercial space above a dry cleaner accessed through a back stairwell with 2 exits and windows on both street-facing sides. Lucien's technical person arrived 20 minutes after them, a woman in her 30s named Hessa, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the expression of someone who had been woken up at an inconvenient hour and had decided to be professional about it anyway. Hessa sat up at the table without being asked and began building a false trail. server access preparation traffic, the digital signature of a team positioning for an authentication operation, noise in the right channels, footprints pointing the wrong direction. It needs to look real, Serafina told her, not obviously staged. I know what it needs to look like, Hessa said, without looking up. Serafina found that she respected that. At 11:47 a.m., she picked up her phone and called Danny. It rang twice. Sarah? Danny's voice came through tight with something that sounded real. The specific pitch of controlled worry, the voice of someone trying to sound steady. Thank God. Are you okay? I'm okay, Serafina said, flat, even. I need to tell you something. A small pause. What happened? We're moving tonight, Serafina said. She kept her voice tired, slightly strung out. The voice of someone at the end of their resources who was telling a trusted person more than they should. I can't go into details, but there's a server, Damien's private server. We have access and we're going in tonight, and if it works... She let her voice crack slightly on the end of that, just slightly, controlled. It's over. All of it. Silence on the other end for 3 seconds. Sarah, Danny said carefully. Who is we? I can't say. Is this Moretti? Are you still with Moretti? Danny, I just needed to tell someone. She stopped, breathed. If something goes wrong tonight, the attorney's name is Caleb Marsh. He has copies of everything, okay? You remember that name. Caleb Marsh, Danny repeated, and the repetition was immediate and automatic. The reflex of someone whose role was to receive and transmit information. And Serafina heard it, and it confirmed the thing she already knew, and the confirmation was a small cold stone settling in her chest. I have to go, Serafina said. Sarah... She ended the call. She set the phone face down on the table. She kept her hand on it for a moment, palm flat. Then she removed her hand. Lucien was watching from across the room. She looked at him. It's done, she said. He nodded once. She looked at the wall. How long? She said. Hessa's traffic will reach the right monitors in approximately 40 minutes, he said. If VAS responds to the combination of your call and the digital activity, we'd expect movement within 2 hours. And the position we're drawing him to. A logistics facility on the south side, near the canal. Damien's company runs freight coordination through it. Legitimate operations. VAS would recognize it as a plausible server location. It gives him a reason to approach that doesn't expose his hand. She nodded. You've used it before, she said. Once, he said. Different situation. She looked at him. How many times has something gone wrong on an operation like this? She said. He held her gaze. Define wrong, he said. She almost laughed. It came out of her without warning, but brief, humorless, real. He watched it happen with something in his face that wasn't quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Wrong enough that people got hurt, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Twice, he said, in situations where the timeline was compressed and the information was incomplete. And this situation has both of those qualities, he said. Yes. She appreciated the honesty enough not to respond to it. At 1:15 p.m., Hessa looked up from the laptop. Movement, she said. Lucian moved to the table, looked at the screen. Serafina stood. Voss's location, Lucian said. 2 vehicles just left the Pilsen property. Heading where? Hessa tracked it on screen. South, Canal Corridor. It had worked. The 2 hours that followed had the particular quality of time before something irreversible, each minute distinct and separate, the way time broke into individual units when the body understood that the aggregate was limited. Serafina ate half a sandwich because Cord put it in front of her, and she recognized the logic of it. She went over the layout of the logistics facility with Lucien, twice, then a third time, tracing the floor plan on a physical printout with her finger until she could close her eyes and walk it. She was not going to be passive in this. That was the decision she'd made somewhere in the night and fully committed to now. She was not going to be the person in the safe room while other people operated in the space that was hers to operate in. The evidence she needed, the specific documentation that exonerated her completely and built the federal case against Damien and the network. That documentation required her present, her voice, her specific knowledge of the operational architecture she'd built, and that Damien had corrupted. She was the only person in the city who understood it from the inside. She told Lucien this at 2:15 p.m. He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not going to argue with you," he said. "Good. I'm going to give you a specific position and ask you to hold it, not a passive position, a critical one." He pointed to the floor plan. "The server access terminal is here. If Vass's people try to destroy the hardware before we secure it, this is the point they'll move through. I need someone who can operate the access in real time and who understands the architecture well enough to move fast." She looked at the position on the floor plan. "That's not the safest location," she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at him. "Okay," she said. They left at 3:30 p.m. in two vehicles. Cord drove her car, Lucien in the passenger seat, two of his people in the rear. The second vehicle ran parallel 2 blocks over. The city moved past the windows in the gray November afternoon light, the south side in winter. The particular mix of industrial and residential that the city's geography produced down here, freight rail and flat-roofed commercial buildings, and churches with marquee signs and corner stores with steel security doors. She watched it go by and thought about the last time she'd driven this part of the city, a work day, 18 months ago. A supplier visit she'd taken because Damien had a conflict. Routine, unremarkable. The city looking exactly like itself, no foreshadowing. The logistics facility was a large building in a block of large buildings, the kind of commercial architecture designed for function and nothing else. High ceiling, wide bay doors, a loading dock running the south face. Lucien's people had been inside for an hour already. The building had been empty since 6 a.m. when the day crew left. Lucien's contact in the company's administrative structure had arranged a maintenance window. They entered through a side access. Interior. The familiar smell of freight facilities everywhere, diesel and cardboard, and the cold metal smell of concrete in winter. High metal shelving stacked with logistics equipment. Forklift parked near the south bay. The ceiling 30 feet overhead with industrial strip lighting, half of it currently off. Lucien's people were positioned in a pattern she couldn't fully map because they were good at not being visible. She clocked 2 near the north wall, 1 in the shelving, suspected more she couldn't see. The server terminal was in a glass-partitioned office at the facility's northeast corner. Real hardware, Damien's actual secondary system accessed through the facility's data infrastructure, routed here 6 months ago when Lucien's team had identified the connection. She'd been told this earlier. She walked to it now with purpose, sat down, examined the interface. The first authentication stage came up immediately, the password prompt. Hessa's work this morning had pre-positioned a credential that would open this door without triggering the outer alert. Serafina typed the sequence Hessa had given her. The system accepted it. The second stage loaded, the biometric panel. She looked at the voice prompt on screen. The enrollment phrase, waiting. She leaned toward the microphone, and the lights went out, full dark. The strip lighting cut completely, the ambient glow of the facility's emergency panels the only thing remaining. Low orange, barely functional, painting everything in the color of old rust. She heard Lucien's voice from somewhere left of her. Stay. Single word, completely controlled. Then she heard the bay door, the south bay door. The large freight entrance began to roll. The mechanical grind of it was loud in the sudden dark, and cold air pushed into the building from outside. And with the cold air came voices speaking in low, rapid bursts in a language she didn't know. They hadn't been drawn to the building. They'd been positioned outside it already. The realization landed in her chest like something physical, the understanding that the trap had not been reversed but doubled. That Vass hadn't come to the facility in response to the bait. He'd been here before the bait was sent, which meant the trail they'd laid was secondary, which meant there was a different information channel she hadn't accounted for. Movement in the dark. 3 shapes, 4, coming through the bay door with flashlights sweeping. Gunfire. The first shots were from Lucien's side. Controlled, 2 shots, suppressed, coming from the direction of the north wall. She heard something hit the concrete, then return fire, loud and uncontrolled, multiple weapons. The sound of it in the enclosed metal space enormous and disorientating, the muzzle flashes strobing the dark. She dropped below the desk. Her heart was hitting her rib cage with the mechanical repetition of something that didn't know how to stop. Not terror exactly, not the paralysis she might have expected, but a kind of total sensory acuity, every sound and flash and degree of temperature suddenly precise and individual. She kept her hand on the keyboard. Above her head, the monitor was still active, the biometric panel still waiting, the voice prompt cursor blinking with absolute indifference to everything happening in the room. She needed 10 seconds. Maybe 15. She heard Lucien's voice again, closer now, and then the sound of a collision. Bodies, the grunt of impact, something metallic hitting the concrete floor. She kept low and put her mouth near the microphone panel and said the enrollment phrase. The system processed. A light on the panel went from red to amber. Partial match. Awaiting fingerprint. She reached for the fingerprint scanner. A hand closed around her wrist. Not Lucien's hand. She pulled hard. The grip tightened and yanked her sideways out of the chair, and she went with the motion rather than against it, the only rational response, turning into the pull, getting her feet under her, coming up facing the shape in the dark that was a man she'd never seen before. Broad and very close, his face a composition of orange emergency light and shadow. She drove her elbow into his face. It wasn't a clean hit. It caught his cheekbone rather than his nose, and cost her the wrist grip but not the pain. She felt the impact run up her arm to the shoulder and braced for his response, which came immediately. A shove that sent her back into the desk hard enough that the edge of it hit the middle of her back and stole her breath. She grabbed the monitor, threw it at him. Not effective. Effective enough. It made him step back, made him raise an arm, gave her 2 seconds, and she used them to get back to the terminal. Get her thumb onto the fingerprint scanner while the enrollment phrase verification was still active, while the amber light was still waiting. The system processed. The light went green. The server opened. She heard a gunshot from directly behind her, close enough that the sound was physical, a pressure against her eardrums, and spun around to find the man from the dark on the ground, and Lucien standing over him with a weapon in his hand, and blood running down his left forearm from a gash that hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. "Download," she said. "The drive. I need a drive." Lucien reached into his jacket and produced a device she recognized, a high-speed extraction drive, and handed it to her without speaking. She plugged it in, initiated the transfer. The file size indicator loaded. 43 gigabytes. Estimated transfer time, 11 minutes. 11 minutes. Lucien looked at the screen and then at the room. Serafina could see 3 shapes on the floor in the orange-lit dark. One of Lucien's people was down. She couldn't tell how badly. Cord was moving along the north wall. At least 2 of Voss's men were still somewhere in the facility. "How long?" Lucien said. 11 minutes. He looked at her. "Okay," he said. He moved away from the terminal. She heard him exchange words in low-clipped sentences with Cord. She kept her back to the wall beside the terminal and her eyes on the bar filling on the monitor screen and listened to the facility. Footsteps in the shelving, a light sweeping the north section. Cord's voice low. 2 o'clock, upper shelf. Then movement. Fast. The sound of someone jumping from height, the crack of impact, more struggle, a single shot. Quiet. The transfer bar, 18%. She breathed. Her back was aching from the desk impact. The specific deep bruise ache of soft tissue hit against a hard edge. She noted it and set it aside. She was watching the bar and listening to the facility and holding very still and doing the specific thing her mind had always been good at when under pressure, maintaining the one necessary function and letting everything else run at a lower register. 31%. Lucien came back. He was moving differently than before. Not injured, but altered in the way people got altered when something close had happened and they were managing the metabolic aftermath. "Vas," she said. "Not here," Lucien said. He was breathing harder than normal. "He didn't come himself. He sent people." "Smart." "Yes." She looked at the transfer bar. 44%. "The channel I didn't account for," she said. "How did they know we were here before the bait was sent?" Lucien was quiet for a moment. "The attorney," he said. "Caleb Marsh." She stared at him. Marsh has been under syndicate pressure for 4 months, Lucian said. His voice had the flat, careful quality of information delivered without editorializing. Financial leverage? They found a liability in his practice from 2 years ago, and they've been holding it. When you called Danny this morning and gave her his name, they'd already been watching him. The mention confirmed that you'd been working with him. His office was accessed this morning. She absorbed that. So they didn't just know my legal strategy, she said. They had a monitor inside it. Yes. She looked at the transfer bar. 58%. How many of my strategies have been clean, she said, in the last 8 months? How many approaches have I made that they didn't know about? Lucien was quiet. Lucien. Very few, he said. Possibly none. The words landed in the space between them, and she let them land. Did not look away from the transfer bar. Did not allow the thing that was rising in her. The enormous, structureless exhaustion of it. The understanding that her 8 months of fighting had been 8 months of fighting inside a box built around her. To become anything operational in her face or body right now. 67%. There would be time to feel the full weight of it. Not now. The drive completes, she said. And then what? We get out of the building, Lucien said. We go to ground. I have a contact at the FBI field office, someone who has been building against the syndicate independently. The files on that drive are the evidentiary core of a federal case. We hand them off tonight. And Vass? Vass is still in Chicago, Lucien said. He doesn't leave until he knows this was contained. We've disrupted his operation significantly enough that he may decide to handle it himself now. Which means he comes to you. Which means he comes to me, Lucien said. Yes. She looked at him. In the orange emergency light, he looked the way the city looked from high up at night. All the architecture visible, but the detail compressed. The essential form of the thing standing clearly, and everything peripheral reduced. Your arm, she said. He looked at the gash on his forearm, pressed the back of his other hand against it briefly. It's manageable. It needs a tourniquet at minimum. After the drive, he said. She looked at the bar. 79%. Cord appeared from the dark of the facility. We've got a vehicle inbound on the south approach. 2 minutes out, maybe less. Lucien looked at the screen. She looked at the screen. 83%. How many does Vass travel with? She said. Variable, Lucien said. Minimum 4. More if he considers this a primary engagement. Does he consider this a primary engagement? Lucien's jaw set. If he's coming himself, he said, then yes. 88%. She heard the vehicle outside, the engine idle of something large, then cutting, doors, 91%. Lucien checked his weapon, said something to Cord in a register she couldn't hear. 3 of his people materialized from positions in the facility and took new positions. The geometry of the room reorganizing around the South Bay door, 94%. The South Bay door began to move again, rolling cold air. The orange light of the facility bleeding out into the late afternoon dark outside. 96%. She saw the silhouette first. A man in the center of the bay door opening, unhurried, hands loose, the silhouette of someone who moved through dangerous situations as a professional condition of life and had long since stopped tensing for them. Medium height, slight build, the specific compact stillness of a man whose physical economy was total. Gregor Vass. Behind him, 4 men with weapons in hand, spreading wide as they entered. Vass looked across the facility. In the orange emergency light, his face was difficult to read, but she could see the direction of his attention. Moving over Lucien's positioned people, assessing the field, landing briefly on the glass partition and the active terminal inside it. Landing on her. He looked at her for 2 seconds. Then he looked at Lucien. I was wondering when this would become direct, Vass said. His English was clean, accented, unhurried. The voice of a man who saw no reason to perform urgency. It's been direct for some time, Lucien said. For you, Vass said. For me it was business, your ports, your contracts, your city. He tilted his head slightly. You took it personally. You made it personal, Lucien said. When you started working through Damien Cross. 97%. Vas glanced again at the terminal. Whatever's on that drive, he said, is going to be very difficult to use. His voice remained conversational. Federal investigators have a chain of custody requirement. Evidence obtained this way tends to develop complications. Evidence obtained by a law enforcement confidential informant doesn't, Lucien said, which is what the person currently downloading those files is classified as of approximately 6 hours ago. A beat. Vas looked at Serafina. She looked back at him. She hadn't known that. 6 hours ago, apparently, Lucien had made a phone call she hadn't been told about, to a federal contact she hadn't known existed, and had arranged a classification that changed the legal architecture of everything she was holding in her hands. She filed the information for later. 98%. Vas moved his gaze back to Lucien. Something had shifted in the quality of his attention, still controlled, still professional, but with an edge in it now that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago. You've been building this for a long time, Vas said. Yes, Lucien said. The woman, Vas said. She's not what I expected. No, Lucien said. His voice had something in it she hadn't heard from him before. She isn't. 99%. Vas looked at the terminal. He looked at his men. His right hand moved, and the screen behind her read 100%. She heard the completion chime, small, electronic, absurdly ordinary against the sound of Vas's right hand moving and the 4 men behind him shifting their weapons and the particular held breath quality of a room that had just become a single compressed decision. She pulled the drive from the terminal. Lucien fired first. Not at Vas. At the strip lighting panel on the north wall. One shot, the panel exploding in a cascade of sparks, and the facility dropping from orange emergency light into near total dark. And in the half-second of universal disorientation that followed, Serafina was already moving, low and left, the drive in her closed fist, the desk at her back, the glass partition between her and the main floor. The room erupted. It was not like the movies. It was loud in a way that was more physical than auditory. The percussion of it hitting her chest and ears simultaneously, muzzle flashes strobing the dark in disconnected frames, each flash freezing a different still image. Cord behind a steel shelving unit, weapon up, one of Vas's men dropping, another advancing. Lucien moving along the east wall with the economy of someone who had done this in the dark before, and understood the geometry of it. She kept moving, stayed low. The partition glass was between her and the main floor, but glass was not cover. She knew that, had learned it from a detail in a report she'd read during the 8 months, some forensic document she'd absorbed while trying to understand the world she'd been pulled into. And she moved past it and into the shelving corridor that ran the east face of the building. A hand caught her collar. She spun and drove her elbow back before she knew whose hand it was and felt it connect, and heard a grunt and came around with her arm raised and stopped. Cord. His lip was cut. He held up a hand, steady, not aggressive. This way, he said. He moved fast, and she followed him through the shelving corridor, navigating by the thin ambient light from the high windows. Just enough, just barely. The shapes of things visible if you kept your eyes adjusted and didn't look at the muzzle flashes. Behind them, the sounds of the fight continued, controlled on Lucien's side, less controlled on Vas's. The difference between people who knew the building and people who were operating in unfamiliar terrain. She registered this while she moved, filed it, held the drive in her fist with the particular grip of someone who understood what they were carrying. Cord got them to a door in the northeast corner. A personnel exit, alarmed, but Lucien's people had cut the alarm hours ago. He pushed through and cold air hit her face, and they came out into the narrow service lane that ran the facility's east side. The sky above them a dark gray bruise between the building edges, the city's ambient light diffusing through it. A vehicle at the end of the lane, running. One of Lucien's people behind the wheel. Cord put her in the back. Lucien, she said. He's finishing it, Cord said. He was already on his phone, speaking fast and quiet. She looked back at the building. The sounds from inside had changed. Fewer shots, more interval between them, the specific dying rhythm of a fight in its final exchange. She watched the personnel door. 40 seconds. 60. The door opened. Lucien came through it walking, not running, which told her something. He was holding his left arm slightly different than normal, not cradling it, not demonstrating injury, just a subtle mechanical compensation in the shoulder. The gash from earlier had been joined by something newer on the same arm, higher up, and his shirt on that side was dark. He scanned the lane in both directions before he moved toward the vehicle, and the scanning was automatic and professional and completely unhurried. He got into the front passenger seat. "Vas," she said. "Detained," he said. His voice was slightly compressed, the compression of someone managing pain at a low level, keeping it below the operational threshold. 2 of his men are mobile, 2 aren't. Cord's people are handling containment. Detained meaning he's alive and in a position to be handed to federal custody tonight. He looked at her over his shoulder, a single, direct look. "The drive." She held it up. He looked at it for a moment. Just looked at it, the small rectangular device in her hand, 43 gigabytes of the architecture of a conspiracy that had cost her a year of her life. Then he looked at her face, and there was something in his expression that she hadn't seen from him before. Something unguarded and slightly raw. "Good," he said. The vehicle moved. They drove north through the south side in the early evening dark, the city indifferent and ongoing around them, and Serafina sat in the back seat and let herself feel the full weight of her back where the desk had hit it, and the soreness in her elbow, and the specific hollowed-out feeling that came after sustained adrenaline. The body's invoice for what it had done in the last 4 hours, arriving now that the account was temporarily settled. She looked at the drive in her hand. She thought about the enrollment phrase she'd spoken into the terminal microphone, the sentence she'd read on a Tuesday morning 18 months ago for an IT security protocol while thinking about something else entirely. Her own voice, weaponized, turned back on itself, used against her as a lock, and then used by her as the key. There was something exact about that. She sat with it. The FBI field office contact was a woman named Carla Wren, deputy special agent, 12 years in organized crime, who received them in a parking structure 3 blocks from the federal building at 7:15 p.m. with the particular manner of someone who had been briefed, had adjusted her evening accordingly, and had many questions she was going to ask in a specific order. Serafina had been told about Wren in the car. The 6-hour-old classification Lucien had arranged, confidential informant status, properly documented, the chain of custody clean from the moment of the download, had been Wren's doing. Lucien and Wren had been building toward this for 4 months, a parallel track she hadn't known about, running underneath the operation she'd been part of. She should have been angry about that. She found she didn't have the bandwidth for it. Not tonight. Wren was mid-40s, short hair, a face that had learned not to broadcast its reactions. She looked at Serafina for a long moment when they met. The professional assessment of someone cataloging a person they've been reading about in reports, and then she held out her hand. "Ms. Vale," she said. "Agent Wren," Serafina said. They shook hands. Wren looked at the drive. 43 gigabytes, Serafina said. The top-level directory structure gives you the full routing network, all 4 shell account chains, the syndicate's financial infrastructure as it connects to Cross Meridian, the altered audit documents alongside the originals, and approximately 600 emails between Damien Cross and 3 syndicate intermediaries over the past 14 months. She paused. The emails are date-stamped and server-verified. He didn't bother encrypting the communications once he believed his exposure was managed. Wren looked at the drive, then at Serafina. "You accessed this system yourself," Wren said. "I did. Using credentials you had legal standing to possess at the time they were created." "Correct," Wren nodded slowly. The professional satisfaction of someone watching a case architecture click into its correct configuration. "The biometric profile on the server," Wren said. "Your voice and fingerprint, enrolled without your knowledge or consent post-termination." "That's in there too," Serafina said. "The enrollment logs, the credential that accessed my personnel file, the access timestamps." She held Wren's gaze. "Danny Reeves, paralegal at Halloran and Cross." She pulled the data. Wren's expression didn't change. "We're aware of Ms. Reeves." "How aware?" "Aware enough to have questions we'd like to ask her tonight," Wren said, "with or without her cooperation." Serafina looked at the drive in Wren's hand now. She'd given it over smoothly, easily, the handoff clean and practiced looking, even though she'd never done anything like it in her life. She thought about what it meant to let it go. The physical transfer of the thing she'd gone into a dark building to get, the thing she'd used her own voice to unlock, the thing Danny had tried to prevent the syndicate from losing by sending 3 men to her apartment. She thought about how it felt to give it to someone else to use. It felt like putting down something heavy. It felt like the right weight, carried to the right place. "What happens to the exoneration documentation?" Serafina said. "We file a formal notice with the district court within 48 hours, Wren said. "The charges against you were always conditional on the cross-meridian audit findings. Once those findings are demonstrated to have been fabricated, the charges dissolve. The civil litigation follows. It'll take time, but the foundation is clear." She paused. "Your name will be clean, Ms. Vale, publicly and legally." Serafina held her gaze. She'd waited 8 months to hear that sentence. She'd run through versions of it in her head during the worst of the nights. The depositions, the meetings with lawyers who told her the evidence was very thorough. The morning she'd read the 3rd news story about herself and understood that her professional identity had been effectively demolished, and that she'd have to build something in its place from whatever was left. She'd imagined the moment when the sentence arrived. She hadn't imagined feeling this tired when it did. "Thank you," she said. Wren nodded. "Thank you," she said, and meant it differently. Lucien had been standing 6 feet away through the exchange, slightly back, the deliberate posture of a man who understood that this part of the evening was not his to occupy. He'd had his arm looked at by a medic who'd appeared from somewhere in Wren's orbit, the wound wrapped, the shirt sleeve rolled down over it, the blood still visible at the cuff. When Serafina turned back toward him, he was watching her, and he didn't rearrange his expression when she looked. "It's done," she said. "Most of it," he said. Damien is tomorrow," she said. "Tonight, it's done." He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. They didn't go back to the safe apartment. Lucien took her to a hotel in the River North area. Not ostentatious, not anonymous, somewhere between the two, the kind of place that valued its guests' privacy as a business proposition. A room on the 14th floor with a view north toward the lake, the city grid laid out below in amber and white, the December cold pressing against the glass and the radiator in the room clicking and working. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her hands. The knuckles were slightly abraded from the fall in the facility. The right elbow was bruised through the fabric of her dress, swelling beginning to settle into it with the particular dull heat of developing tissue damage. She was still in the black dress from the gala. She had been in this dress for 9 hours, the dress she'd bought for a different event, a different version of her life. There was a knock. She opened the door. Lucien, jacket off, the wrapped arm visible below his rolled sleeve, carrying a paper bag that smelled like food. "You should eat," he said. "You should sit down," she said. "You've been on your feet since 3. He came in. She left the door open for a moment, not from ambivalence about him being there, but from the particular habit of someone who'd spent 8 months maintaining careful control over her own space, who'd had that control violated in ways she was still fully processing. Then she closed it. He set the bag on the small table by the window, produced 2 containers of something from a Vietnamese restaurant nearby, sat in one of the 2 chairs. She sat in the other. They ate without speaking for a few minutes. The city did its thing outside the glass. Somewhere below, a siren moved through and faded. "The contact you had at the FBI," she said. "Wren, you've been working with her for 4 months." "Yes." "You didn't tell me." He looked at her. "No." She held his gaze. "Why?" "Because the agreement with Wren required the information flow to be controlled," he said. "The more people who knew the federal component existed, the higher the risk of a breach. Vass's people had already demonstrated penetration into your legal circle." He paused. "It wasn't a judgment about you, it was a judgment about the architecture." She thought about that. "That's a reasonable answer," she said. "It's the true answer. They're not always the same thing with you." He looked at her steadily. Something in his expression acknowledged the observation without contesting it. "No," he said. "They're not always the same." She ate. Outside the city, the radiator clicking. The confidential informant classification, she said. That was Ren's arrangement, but you initiated it. Yes. 6 hours before the operation. Yes. Which means you decided that before I decided I was going into the building with your people. A beat. Yes, he said. She looked at him. You knew I was going to, she said, before I told you. He was quiet for a moment. I know how you move through a situation, he said. You've been doing it for 3 days in front of me. You don't wait at the edge of something when you understand the stakes. You move toward it. He looked at his food. I thought the classification was the right protection for when you did. She sat with that. The particular quality of being known, seen, anticipated, understood by someone you'd met 72 hours ago in the specific way that only happened when someone had been paying very close attention to you and had chosen to use that attention in your favor rather than against it. You could have told me about the classification, she said, when you made the call. I could have, he said. I should have. She nodded. Let it be. They finished eating. He cleared the containers with the automatic courtesy of a man who'd spent long enough in solitary living to have made peace with its small domestic routines. She stood at the window and looked at the lake, black from here, the far shore of Michigan invisible, the water beginning where the city lights ended and continuing into a dark that had no discernible limit from this angle. Damien files the harassment complaint officially tomorrow, she said, before the federal notice. Ren will coordinate with the district court to hold the complaint pending the evidentiary filing, Lucien said. It becomes moot within 48 hours. He'll fight it. He'll fight it from a position of zero leverage, on the public record, in front of the same press that covered his arrest. She turned from the window. His arrest, she said. Lucien looked at her. Ren has a warrant, he said. Damien Cross is in Washington until Thursday. He comes back to federal agents at O'Hare. She thought about that. About Damien at the podium. The smooth, regretful voice. I wish her well, but I can't allow this behavior to continue. The full architecture of the man. The intelligence, the patience, the specific cruelty of someone who did his damage very slowly and very carefully, and then stood in good light while it was attributed to the weather. What charges? She said. Fraud, money laundering, RICO for the syndicate connection, conspiracy. Lucien paused. 43 gigabytes, Serafina. There's enough in that drive to put him away for a very long time. She looked at her hands. She'd spent 8 months with Damien's destruction as a fixed point in her imagination. The thing she was moving toward, the organizing principle of the entire period. She'd thought about it in different forms. Legal, reputational, financial. She'd imagined the headline, the moment, the specific satisfaction of reversal. She'd held on to it through the worst of the nights the way people held on to fixed stars when everything else was moving. Now it was done, or as close to done as the world ever got, and what she felt was not the satisfaction she'd imagined. It was quieter, less defined, something that lived closer to exhaustion than triumph, and had a sadness in it she hadn't anticipated. I thought it would feel different, she said. Not to him specifically, just to the room. He didn't offer a correction to that. He just let it exist. The way things you want for a long time feel different when you get them, he said after a moment. Yes. She looked at him. Has that happened to you? She said. He was quiet for a moment. I spent 6 years building a position in this city, he said. Control of the ports, the freight contracts, the infrastructure. I wanted it because it was what survival looked like from where I was standing when I started. He looked at his hands, the scarred right knuckle, the wrapped left forearm. When I had it, it felt like maintenance, not a rival, just a different set of things to protect. She looked at him carefully, at the specific quality of the admission, not self-pity, not performance, just a factual report from a man who had been honest with himself about the distance between what he'd wanted and what it had given him. And now, she said. He met her eyes. Now, he said, is different from before. She held his gaze for a moment. In the window glass behind him, she could see her own reflection. The black dress, the hair coming loose from its arrangement, the face that had carried 12 hours of a specific kind of weight, and was not bothering to hide it. She looked the way she felt. That was something, she thought. That was not nothing. She sat back down in the chair. The radiator clicked. The city hummed at a frequency that was below sound, structural, felt through the soles of the feet and the base of the spine. "Danny," she said. Lucien was quiet. "What happens to her?" "Ren has a file on her that goes back 11 months, he said. "The credential access, the biometric data pull, the attorney communications. She'll be questioned, charged, most likely. The degree depends on what she can offer." "She'll offer what she has," Serafina said. "She's not going to protect Damien or the syndicate. Not now that the operation is exposed." She paused. "She's not built for this. She never was." Lucien looked at her. "You're not angry," he said. Not a challenge. Genuine observation. "I'm angry," she said. "I'll probably be angry for a long time." She looked at the window. "But she sent me that email this morning. I didn't know it would go this far. I've been thinking about that sentence for 12 hours. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know what she was told when she was recruited. I don't know what they offered her or what they threatened her with. I don't know when she understood the full scope of what she was doing." She looked at Lucien. "Neither do you." "No," he said. "Neither do I." "So I'm angry," she said, "and I don't know yet what else I am about it, and I'm not going to decide tonight." He nodded. She closed her eyes for a moment, just a moment, felt the chair under her, the residual heat of the room, the specific quality of a building at night when the day's movement has stopped and the structure settles into itself. She thought about the enrollment phrase, the sentence she'd read into a microphone on a Tuesday morning 18 months ago. "The Blue Ridge extends along the western horizon at dawn, where the light arrives before the warmth." A sentence chosen for phonemic range, covering the full acoustic vocabulary of the English language in one continuous breath. She'd unlocked the thing that had been built to contain her using her own voice. She thought about that for a long time. She thought about the attorney who told her the evidence was very thorough, and she thought about the night on the apartment floor, and she thought about 8 months of walking through a city that had been instructed to see her a specific way, and she thought about the woman who'd stood in the Blackstone ballroom while her name was taken apart piece by piece in front of cameras. That woman had been her. She was still her. The difference was architectural, interior, not visible from the outside in any way she could have pointed to, but present through the floor, through the walls, through the way she was sitting in this chair right now. The particular posture of someone who had been broken down to the load-bearing elements and found the load-bearing elements sufficient. She opened her eyes. Lucien was watching her. He didn't pretend he hadn't been. "I need to sleep," she said. "Yes," he said. He stood. He moved toward the door with the same economy he moved with everywhere. No wasted motion, no performance of consideration. At the door he stopped, turned slightly. "There'll be things to handle tomorrow," he said. "Ren will need a formal statement. The attorney situation. The public peace when Damien's arrest goes through the news cycle." He paused. "You don't have to be alone for any of it." She looked at him. "Is that an offer?" she said. He held her gaze. "Yes," he said. "That's an offer." She looked at him for a long moment, at the man who had walked into a room and changed its physics by existing in it, who had stood over her like a question she hadn't known she was being asked, who had made decisions she hadn't been consulted on and told her the truth when the decisions were wrong, and whose arm was wrapped in medical gauze because he had spent 4 hours moving through a dark building to protect something he'd decided was worth protecting. "Okay," she said. He nodded once, opened the door. "Lucien," she said. He stopped. "The confidential informant classification," she said, 6 hours before the operation, before I told you I was going in." She held his gaze. "That wasn't architecture." Something moved through his expression. Brief. Real. "No," he said. "That wasn't architecture." He left. She sat for a while longer. The city outside, the radiator, the black water of the lake at the end of the amber grid. Then she got up, took the dress off, found a hotel robe in the closet, and lay down on the bed in the dark. She did not think about Damien. She did not think about the drive, or Ren, or the warrant waiting at O'Hare. She thought about the enrollment phrase, The blue ridge extending along the western horizon at dawn, where the light arrives before the warmth. A sentence that covered everything the human voice could produce. She'd read it without thinking about it, 18 months ago, and it had been taken from her and used, and she had taken it back tonight in a dark building with people shooting at each other across the distance and her back against a wall and her voice steady. She fell asleep holding that. She slept through the night for the first time in 8 months. In the morning, it was still dark when she woke. 5:43 a.m., the city outside beginning its pre-dawn reorganization. The lake barely visible as a different quality of dark against the sky. She lay in the robe in the hotel bed and looked at the ceiling and felt the full inventory of the last 3 days settle into her body as weight and soreness and the specific fatigue of sustained high function. Her phone showed 14 notifications. She did not look at them yet. She showered, dressed in clothes that Cord had apparently left outside her door at some point during the night. A bag with a note in handwriting she didn't recognize. Vasily pulled these from your building. Your coat is in there. The coat she'd left on the hook by her apartment door when she'd chosen the black dress instead. She held it for a moment before she put it on. Its specific weight, its familiar smell. Then she went to the window. Dawn was beginning. The first gray light finding the city from the east, the lake defining itself against the sky. The grid below beginning to move. Early trucks, a bus, a man walking a dog on the corner 4 streets down. The city returning to itself from wherever it went in the hours before this. She thought about what came next. Not in the operational sense. Wren, the statement, Damien's arrest, the legal process of exoneration, the slow public work of rebuilding a professional identity from demonstrably solid ground. Those things she understood. Those things had a sequence and a logic, and she was competent to move through them. She thought about the other thing. The thing with no sequence and limited logic, the thing that lived in the part of her that had nothing to do with competence. A knock. She opened the door. Lucien with coffee. 2 cups, the kind from an actual coffee shop, not the hotel machine. Dark circles under his eyes. The arm in a fresh wrap, the shirt clean, the controlled economy of a man who had slept 3 hours and was not going to discuss that. She took the cup he offered. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. They stood in the doorway for a moment, the morning coming in from the window behind her, the corridor light behind him, the two of them in the threshold. "The warrant executed at 5 a.m., he said. Damien was detained at Dulles for processing. The federal complaint supersedes the CPD harassment filing. It's already in 2 outlets. He paused. It'll be everywhere by 9. She nodded. "Vass," she said. "Federal custody as of last night. His men are in separate facilities. The syndicate's North American network goes to ground when this breaks, but the financial architecture in those files is the map. Wren's team will work the case for months, but the operational capacity is broken." He held her gaze. "It's over." She looked at him. "Say it again," she said. "Smaller." He understood what she meant. He looked at her directly, not performing anything. "It's over," he said. She felt it then. The thing she'd been holding at operational distance for 72 hours, the thing beneath the adrenaline and the logistics and the managed fury, the actual weight of it, the full human cost, the specific grief and relief and exhaustion of a year of fighting collapsing into a sentence spoken quietly in a hotel doorway at dawn. It moved through her face. She let it. Lucien watched it and didn't look away. When it passed, she was still standing. Her coffee was warm in her hands. The city was still doing its thing outside, indifferent and ongoing, the same city it had been yesterday, when it didn't yet know that Damien Cross was going to spend the rest of the year in federal proceedings. "What happens to you now?" she said. He tilted his head slightly. "What do you mean?" "Vass is in custody. The syndicate's operation is broken. The threat to your infrastructure is resolved." She held his gaze. That was the objective. 6 months of work. It's finished. She paused. "What happens to Lucien Moretti now?" He was quiet for a moment. "The ports don't run themselves," he said. "The contracts, the infrastructure, the work." He looked at the window over her shoulder. "There's always more work." "That's not what I asked." He looked at her. The morning was getting lighter. She could see the lake properly now, the actual color of it in early December dawn, that specific cold blue-gray that was neither sky nor steel, but something in between, the color of deep water in the season before it froze. "I don't know yet," he said. "What I know is that last week looked different from this week." "Because of the operation," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him, at the stripped-down honesty of his face in the morning light, the architecture of it, everything peripheral removed, just the essential form of a man who had built himself out of survival and blood, and was standing in a hotel doorway at dawn holding coffee and looking at her like she was the thing that made last week look different. "Lucienne," she said. "Yes." "I need 3 months," she said. "Not from you, just in general. To handle the legal process, to rebuild something professional, to live in my own apartment again, and remember what quiet feels like." She held his gaze. "I'm not a woman who runs from things. I'm not running from this. I just need to stand in my own space for a while before I decide what I want to move toward." He looked at her for a long moment. 3 months, he said. "Maybe 2, she said. "I don't know yet." Something in his expression that was not quite a smile, the shadow of one, the structural component of one. "Okay," he said. "That's it," she said. "Just okay." "What do you want me to say?" She thought about it. "Nothing," she said. "Okay is right." He nodded once. She stepped back from the doorway. He didn't follow. He understood the geometry of the moment, the specific architecture of a woman reclaiming her own threshold. "Ren wants the formal statement at 10, he said. "I'll be there at 9:45, she said. He turned to go. "Lucienne." He stopped, looked back. She looked at him across the threshold in the morning light, at the man who had walked into a room and decided something, at the man who had arranged a federal classification 6 hours before she asked him to, at the man who had stood over her in a dark facility with blood on his arm and said good when she held up the drive, meaning something larger than the drive. 2 months, she said. Probably 2. The expression that crossed his face was brief and unguarded and entirely real. He left. She turned back to the window. The lake was fully visible now, the dawn complete, the city below in full early motion, the bus routes running, the trucks moving freight, the coffee shops lit and occupied, the particular vigorous ordinary life of a city that had never stopped being itself through all of it, that would continue being itself after the news cycle moved on and the federal proceedings became procedural and the name Serafina Vale stopped being a shorthand for anything and became just a name again. She drank her coffee. She looked at the lake. She thought about the enrollment phrase, the sentence about the Blue Ridge, the western horizon, the light arriving before the warmth. And she thought about all the things you said without knowing you were saying them, all the things you read into microphones on Tuesday mornings that got taken from you and used, and that you had to come back to yourself through dark buildings to reclaim. She thought about what it meant to have done that, to have stood in the building with the guns and the dark and the 43 gigabytes and the 30-second window and her own voice and said the phrase clean and steady and meant it, to have been the woman in the ballroom with her name being taken apart in front of cameras, and to have been 8 months later and 3 days later, and right now, still standing. She thought about that for a long time. Then she put the coffee down, picked up her phone, opened the first notification, and began the work of what came next. Outside Chicago in December, cold, particular, entirely itself. The lake going on to the horizon and beyond, the light on the water in the early morning doing what light did when it arrived before the warmth, announcing something, making the shape of things visible before the temperature confirmed them. She read the first notification. The headline was already running. Tech executive Damian Cross detained in federal racketeering probe. Cross Meridian audit documents alleged to be fabricated. She read it once. Then she set the phone face down on the table, not because she didn't want to see it, but because she already had, and that was enough for now, and the morning was still going on outside the glass. The city still doing its work. The lake still there at the end of the amber grid with the light on it that arrived before anything else did. Ahead of everything, showing the shape of the day before the day had decided what it was going to be. She stood in that light. She breathed. That was enough.